Everything started when my grandparents bought this house in 1942, brand new. When I was born, my parents couldn't take care of me. My father was stationed in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The doctors at Fort Bragg told my mother and father to give me to my grandparents for my well-being. So that's how I came home to Baltimore. I was born and raised here, in this haunted house. Things were always a little odd, but the spooks never caused any problems, until I was maybe 5 or 6. Something threw a knife at me in the club room, and that got my grandparents' attention. My grandfather came home one day with a priest and had him re-bless the house. Things got quiet for a while, but afterwards we started to hear voices, our own voices, spoken by another. I would hear my grandmother call, and I would go to see what she wanted, only to find out that she didn't call me. And she once heard me crying in the club room, only to find me playing in the alley on the side of the house. One evening, we were sitting in the living room when all 3 of us heard me yell from the kitchen, "Come here quick." We just looked at each other, dumbfounded. Then we heard my grandfather's voice say a little louder, "Kurtz, come here quick." And we went out into the kitchen and found a man trying to get into the back door. After he died in 1977, things quieted down for a while, but then I started to feel a presence. It wasn't my grandfather. I know it wasn't, because my grandfather hated cats, and they wouldn't come near our yard. You see, I live in a row house, and the alley cats would come down into the yards along the row of houses. Because of my grandfather, they would detour past the alley and up onto a stone wall behind the house, then continue on to the other yards. I was able to take in a cat that almost got hit by a car, and that cat never had a problem in the house. The presence started to feel friendly. It never caused any problems, and I finally started calling it Charlie, and I don't know why, but it just felt right. Over the next few years, things were quiet. Well, except for the entity calling us in each other's voices. One day, I'm out cutting some lawns on another street. My mom gets a phone call from my grandmother, telling her to come down right away, she needs her help. When Mom turns the corner, she sees the neighbors standing on our lawn, looking at my grandmother in the upstairs bathroom window on the outside, washing the windows. My grandmother didn't call her, and Mom said it was her mother's voice. As well, you know there's something there when your cat is lifted 4 feet off of the floor, turned in a circle a couple of times, and then sat gently back on the floor, and the cat is purring the whole time. My brother was staying with us for 6 months before going into the Marines. He finished boot camp and was able to come home to see our grandmother before she passed. This was January of 1990. In 1992, while stationed on Okinawa, he asked Mom to send him 30 of his audio tapes that he had left at my house. Mom gave me the list, and I found them and took them to her. She checked them to make sure that they were all there, and then she boxed them up and mailed them to him. And he only got 23 of them. And a couple of years later, after he got out of the Marines, he found the 7 tapes laying on his bed. Another time, after cleaning his 9mm Browning, he reloaded it and put it on the nightstand. And one day we were discussing the pros and cons of our pistols. Mine is a .38 police special revolver. Before handling mine, I unloaded it. He dropped his clip, and he found his clip empty. I believe there may be something buried in my backyard. I don't know how to describe it, but it's a friendly feeling. Although it doesn't seem to bother the cats, squirrels, and birds, or members of the family. But friends and neighbors have said that there is a heavy, oppressive presence there. One night, 2 men tried to break into our shed. The first man was trying to cut the lock with a small pair of bolt cutters. The other man was standing behind him. I was just about to open the window and stick the pistol out and order them to leave the yard when the second man is lifted about 2 feet off the ground, and he was shaken violently, letting out a scream. The first man with the bolt cutters turned around. I don't know what he saw, but this man's eyes bugged out, and he went white. He was thrown backwards into the shed doors, breaking them. He scrambled to his feet, leaving his cohort behind. He was going over fences like an Olympic hurdler. The second man was also flung to the ground, and he was going over fences in the opposite direction. The 2 neighbors saw what happened, but refused to say what they saw. Another time, My brother's friends were into the occult. His fiancée called herself a witch. The first week he was home, after getting out of the Marines, she came to the house to see him. She lasted almost a minute in the hallway before she ran out of the house. She said that she couldn't breathe, and it felt like pins and needles were sticking in all over her body, and that her skin was on fire. Well, so much for the engagement. Some of his other friends liked to play with Ouija boards, and things were always following him home, like the dead bride or the man in the frock coat and tall hat. I saw him once, one night in the hallway when I was doing the dishes. I turned around and he was standing right there. I could see right through him. In a low whisper, he said my brother's name. I pointed to the cellar steps and stammered, "He's down there." He turned and went down the steps. When my brother came up from the cellar, I asked him if his friend found him, and all he would say is, "I have to go out." I've been followed around the neighborhood by something. I hear the crunching of leaves behind me in the fall and turn around and there's nobody there. In the winter, when I could still walk in the snow, I would hear a crunch of footsteps in the snow right behind me. I would turn around. There was nobody on the sidewalk. I'm the first one to walk on the new fallen snow, and there's a second set of prints stopping 3 feet behind me. As I mentioned before, my brother and his friends like to fool around with the Ouija board. At this time, I used to volunteer at my neighborhood library. And one night, after my shift, I came down the street where people with the Ouija board lived. At the bottom of their front steps is what looks like, well, I say looks like, not what is, a 6-foot-tall grayish beige, don't laugh, rabbit with red glowing eyes, a scar by its left eye, and a chewed-up left ear. People were walking past it and they didn't see it. But I could see it. And oh God, it could see me. It looked right at me. I could feel a malevolence like I've never felt before. I got home and I told my brother what I saw and where I saw it. And yeah, needless to say, he freaked. He got on the phone to his friend, and the next thing I know, I'm on the phone telling her what I saw. I don't know what they did, and I don't want to know, just as long as he doesn't bring anything else home. That was about as extreme as it got. The other ones, they would just move my stuff around, or take some of my things and make me ask for it back. Before Mom passed, she would come down every 2 weeks or so to do laundry. 3 days after, my house keys disappeared, and I can't go out and just leave the house unlocked. 3 days later, my back door key shows up in the middle of my bed. 5 days later, Mom is looking for something in her purses, and she finds the rest of my keys in a purse that she hadn't used in 2 years. The rest of the activities are the usual, well, for this house at least. Toilet flushing, lights turning on and off, stomping up and down the stairs, knocking on the doors, both inside and out. And since Mom passed away back in December, it's been a real roller coaster of activity. Above all, I still live in the house. It's home. I don't bother them, and they bother me to their heart's content. But since my brother moved out, they don't seem to know what to do with themselves. And I don't react the way my brother would. He would start yelling at them and threatening them to get 7 priests and gallons of holy water if they didn't stop messing with his stuff, which just seemed to encourage them all the more. Then, he would threaten them with 14 priests and a tanker truck full of holy water, and other wild threats until they got tired of the game. Me, I just refused to play the game. I asked them to stop, or just return what they took when they were done. Sometimes they didn't, most of the time. And after a couple of weeks or so, or a couple of months, whatever they took would show up on my hobby bench, or some other part of the house. And this normally would get a reaction out of me, like dropping them out of nowhere, in front of, or behind me. I call it Hilda's house, for a little mystery. In reality, that was just the street name. The story isn't scary so much as a record of the many goings-on that happened in a little 2-family house. Before going on, I feel it important to inform all of those who read that my family not only believe in the supernatural, that we are very connected to it in our own way. Each having seen, heard, or felt things that were just plain inexplainable. We don't deny ourselves the belief in something more. That being said, my mother and I have always moved around a lot, as in once a year, maybe every 2 if I was lucky. Gypsy blood, I suppose. My freshman year in high school, the night of the homecoming to be exact, we moved to the house on Hilda. We had a single woman living downstairs, but beyond a few friendly words here and there, we all basically kept to ourselves. Our place being on the 2nd and 3rd floors. The entire 3rd was mine, equipped with a half bath and a laundry room. A great thing to help a freshman feel a little more grown up, don't you think? I'm not exactly sure when it started, or if it had really been going on the entire time and we just didn't notice. But we had quite a few paranormal occurrences here that never really warranted too much fear. My mother never experienced much more than a few dreams that put her more at ease than scared her. I, myself, would sometimes feel my bed sink a bit at night, as if my cat had come up to snuggle, but upon looking and or feeling around for him, I would realize that he hadn't been there at all. A little freaky, but not scary. I would also feel a slight touch every now and then. Nothing malevolent, more like a soft, if not comforting, swipe at my back or a pat on my shoulder. All only happening when in bed. Every so often I would go down to the kitchen, whether coming down for a drink at night or just getting home from school and going to the fridge or pantry or anywhere else with food and hear voices. Obviously, that doesn't sound good, but it was nothing that bothered me too much. A snippet of a random things fading in and out, so I never heard an outright conversation, just enough to know I had some chatty visitors. Then, things got to be a bit on the freakier side, enough to make my heart jump into my throat, or my stomach fall out of my butt, but not enough to convince me to move. I started seeing a man, but he was more of a solid shadow and only ever out of the corner of my eye, no face that I could see, and always wearing a fedora-style hat. I imagined an old-timey gangster from the Al Capone days, only without the guns. He was in no way horrible, just a bit alarming. I would be standing at the TV just after school, trying to choose a channel, because why sit down when you're home alone and you don't have to worry about obstructing anyone's view? Paying very little attention to anything but the boob tube, a voice would say my name from right next to me and behind me, as if somebody had creeped up behind me and extended their neck so I'd feel their breath on my neck. Just a voice saying my name. It was enough to make me jump and scream. A true feat for me since I don't scream easily. Scare? Sure. Scream? No. I, of course, told my mom and we let it go. It happened to me a few more times, but nothing any different than the first. Just a voice calling out my name in a raspy whisper with intent to frighten. One day, my best friend was over, as she was for most of the time in those days. But she is a stone-cold skeptic that got the shock of her life. We came home from school one day, and I went to my room to change. She was heating up a pizza for us when I heard her scream for me. She swore up and down she had just heard a man calling for her. I may have giggled, just a little, and simply told her that it was the Shadow Man, and he liked to mess with us. I'll state for the record that she may have been a skeptic, but having been friends with me, and therefore an extended part of my family since we were 3, she'd heard enough not to argue with me and just took my explanation. Another instance that comes to mind is yet another day. I was in the house by myself, yet again, after school, before Mom got home from work. I was heading upstairs to my room, and anyone who knows a teenager knows what a catch-all is. For those of you that don't, it's a place or surface that literally catches everything. The stairs were mine. The 2nd and 3rd and sometimes 4th stair held everything from books to clothes and shoes. Anything I was just too lazy to lug upstairs at that moment. And it usually stayed there until I tripped or got yelled at to clean off the stairs. One day, with the intent of spending some time in my room, I started up the stairs and looked at my catch-all pile. It really sticks out in my mind because that moment, I looked right at a pair of scissors sitting on top and remember thinking to myself that with as clumsy as I am, I should probably take them upstairs so I don't trip and inadvertently stab myself on the way back down. But I was 15 and lazy. I shrugged it off and only made it up one more stair before being warned. I heard a very distinct voice behind me saying, "Pick it up." So distinct that I thought maybe my mom had come home early and I just hadn't heard her. I whirled about, scared shitless, and my back landed flat on those stairs as I stared at the empty space that awaited behind me. It wasn't a far fall or anything, so I just laid against those stairs until I caught my breath and assured myself I would not have a heart attack. I listened to whoever or whatever ordered me, and indeed took the scissors up with me as I went, holding them the correct way and everything, leaving everything else there, of course. As you've probably realized, we knew there were things in our house. Call them ghosts, spirits, angels, whatever you wish, but they were there, and we lived in harmony, mostly. Being believers, my sister was given the number of a medium through a friend at her work. Her name was Alice, and people swore by her, so my sister booked her and threw a party for the occasion. Each person would get a 30 to 45-minute reading alone with her, while everyone else socialized, ate, and drank. I was too young at the time, because Alice preferred to work with those 18 and older for obvious reasons. But what she had to tell my mom proved everything we'd already known, as well as gave new fun information about my mom's sister and my own past lives. Just fun things to hear. She had not been told any of our house's happenings or lives before that. Alice told my mom that our house indeed did have spirits. Many, in fact. A few stuck out to her. There was a woman in what looked like slightly Amish clothing, so obviously from another time, and a man she couldn't grasp the name of. She said they had stayed mostly in the kitchen and spoke as if gossiping like normal people. They kept the others connected. There was a man, Maurice. Alice had told my mom that he was the one who would touch me at night, that he was nothing to worry about. He was just playful, and the touches were just to let me know that he was there, rather than to actually scare me. She also spoke of a man in black. She said was slightly obscured, if not slightly fuzzy, as if not completely visible. She said he was not good, not bad or demonic, but also not a good spirit. She'd told my mom in detail and in all seriousness that all I had to do to get rid of him was to call on Michael, the archangel, to protect me and take him away. And he would. She said it exactly like that. It wasn't something my mom had to do, but my 15-year-old butt had to get my own help. Sort of empowering, really. That night, laying down for bed, I admittedly was a little wigged out. I'd heard a few creaks, freaked out, and immediately started praying the best I could. I'm not a prayer or a churchgoer, so I was a little choppy with it. I'd also heard it was a good idea when dealing with dark spirits, or worse, to imagine an indestructible white light around you for your protection. So I did. I just asked Michael to come and take the shadow man away. When he had time, of course. And kept repeating my little prayer until I fell asleep. I never saw or heard from the shadow man again. Though I did continue to hear the kitchen gossip and said my good nights to Maurice every night from then on. This happened last year. My sister and her little one, 4 years old at the time, had been visiting me from the UK. I, myself, was definitely no stranger to the supernatural, having grown up in a house that was severely haunted, but even so, it was the fact that things would always escalate whenever my sister was around. She just seemed to be a magnet for these kinds of things. So, on night 3 of them visiting, we're all sitting on the couch, watching a Disney animated film, when we hear the laughter of a little boy coming from the next room. I should point out that this was a decent-sized house, and there were no neighbors on that side, so it would have been impossible for the laughter to have been coming from someplace else. My sister and I looked at each other. "You heard that too, right?" I asked her, to which she had confirmed with a positive. The next day rolls around, and we're all on the second floor, where they had been staying. My sister and I were hanging out in the living room, and the little one was playing in the next room, laughing loudly. Abruptly, she ran out, proclaiming that she wants us to meet her new friend. "Well, who's your new friend?" asked my sister. "The little boy, Mommy," the little one answered back. "He lives in the closet." "Oh, does he?" my sister asked, amused. "He says he's dead," the little one added. Not my sister or her husband had ever taught her that word. This is part of the story that ultimately stretched out over the course of 7 years. 1990, my family and I, father, mother, and older sister, had just relocated to a town called Orjemand, right on the border between Namibia and South Africa. It was a mining town, not open to the general public, but for the residents, it was easy street. Housing was free, water and electricity was free, phone calls to local numbers. It was a pretty good deal, and places never stayed unoccupied for too long. Yet, there was this one house, number 8 First Street, that had been standing empty for almost 7 years. Well, that was about to change. So we had been living there for only a few weeks when my sister started making claims of a faceless woman walking down the hallway at night. My sister was only 6 at the time, so nobody took her too seriously. Kids have wild imaginations, right? So my dad worked down at the airport and was located in the desert, and so small you would have probably missed it if you blinked. It took him about 15 minutes to drive home each day. He'd arrive home at around 17:20, and every day would be the same ritual. He'd open the front door, step inside, say hello, and we would go to greet him. We had been living there for several months when this first event took place. On this day, my mother was cooking in the kitchen. My sister was watching television in the living room, and I was in my bedroom playing with my Legos. 17:20 came around. The front door opened on cue, and my dad says hello, like he always did. We all dropped what we had been doing and walked up to greet him. The only problem? He wasn't there. My sister and I followed my mother outside to find him, but he was nowhere in sight. We checked the driveway, and his car wasn't there either. Confused, we all walked back into the house. About 90 minutes passed with no sign of him, and my mother started to panic, and then the phone rang. It was my dad. Apparently his car had broken down on his way home, and he had walked back to the airport to call her and needed her to come pick him up. My mother asked him what time the car had broken down, and he had explained that he had worked a few minutes late, so it must have been around 17:20. We had no explanation for what happened that day, but we soon would. Some time had passed since the incident with my dad's voice at the door, and life had pretty much gone back to normal. My sister still spoke often of the lady in the hallway, but my parents had chosen the easier route of simply pretending like the previous incident had never happened. So, once again, she mostly went unheard. The next sighting would be by me, still in our first year of living there. On the night of the incident, my parents had been arguing again. They argued a lot back then, and me, frightened, had asked my sister if I could sleep in her bed. She had fallen asleep quite quickly, as she was older and was used to it, but I still struggled sometimes, and their yelling was keeping me awake. I looked down to the floor and saw a pair of eyes staring at me. I looked back, shocked to silence. Then it moved. It was like a sheepdog, and back then we had no pets, and there was no logical explanation for how this dog had gotten into the room. I stared at the door, still closed, back at the dog. I slowly got out of bed to approach the dog, and this frightened him and it ran in my direction, disappearing under the bed. I should mention that the period of me first seeing him to him running under the bed barely lasted longer than 10 seconds. I quickly woke up my sister, telling her there was a dog under her bed, as she was still half asleep and didn't fully grasp what was going on. I was already under the bed, trying to see where my new friend had gone, but he had vanished completely. Neither of us slept well that night, and we would soon start sleeping less and less. In my previous 2 stories, I referenced a woman that my sister had often claimed to see walking through the house. As the incidents in the house started escalating and everyone started taking her more seriously, it was always assumed that the woman had always been there. It would be almost 20 years later that I would discover that not only had we brought the woman there, but we had actually taken her with us when we left.